Howdy, Non here at Information Highwayman, and you are watching today a homepage conversion optimization review requested by Dharmesh at HubSpot.com. And as always with any kind of conversion rate optimization review, we'll be going through the standard food checklist, which stands for first impressions, orientation, objectives, and desirability. First on our checklist is first impressions, and these are all about the gut reaction that we have to a website. They don't have to be particularly objective or scientific, but they are kind of intuitive, and it's a sort of snap judgment that we make whether the site is something that we want to stick around and have a look at, or whether it's something that feels a bit dodgy. Have a look at HubSpot itself. These are obviously my own first impressions, which are coloured by my knowledge of conversion rates and so on, but my first impression is that it feels like it should be slick, but it isn't. There's too much white space, and there's no clear alignment of the text, along with the fact that there isn't very much text at all. Makes you feel visually lost. When you add in these bottom columns here with very bright orange headers, they have a somewhat overwhelming appearance. When you look at the rest of the elements on the page, they kind of grab your attention, but they don't really seem to serve any strong purpose. And overall, the design, to me, it just feels a little bit dated and small time somehow, which obviously isn't what HubSpot is all about. Orientation is the next thing that we need to talk about, and this is really what will guide whether or not the next two items on the list will be effective or not. Orientation is about location. It's where your user is and where he understands that he is. If a prospect arrives on your site and he doesn't actually understand where he is and doesn't really know what you do, he isn't going to be able to make any informed decisions about anything relating to the objectives that you want him to fulfill. Now, having orientation elements on your page isn't enough. You need to actually have them get his attention, and to do that you need to use contrast and eye path. So you need to use things like color and size to make them stand out visually, and you also need to make sure that they're in the correct location as you're reading. So as you read from the top left to the bottom right, it makes sense to have things like orientation elements near the top, because that's the first thing that people are interested in learning. On HubSpot, there's very little to orient users if they don't already know where they are. You've got these large central images here, which is good because they grab attention, but unfortunately they're not self-explanatory and don't give me a sense of my location. Having stolen your user's attention with those, you haven't rewarded it with any kind of useful information. That said, the underlying text here, I'm a business owner and I'm a marketer, those do get my attention because of the fact that they're about me. The difficulty there is that I don't understand what the relevance is. I don't know why it's important that they're about me, why it's important that I'm a business owner and I'm a marketer. Obviously it has something to do with what HubSpot does, but it's not clear what that something is. I can also piece together other clues, such as the word software here, and the word sales and marketing. You've got marketing here, and I saw sales somewhere before. But all of these clues are very disparate, and I have to piece them together myself. There's no clear statement of where I am, which means that I'm a little bit lost. There are also these three primary columns here, and the difficulty with having columns like this is that because we read from the top left to the bottom right in single columns of text, we get confused when we see multiple columns of text reading from left to right, because we don't know which ones to read first. We don't know what they represent. So we have a tendency to treat it a little bit like three people talking at once, for example. So I would strongly suggest that if these are important elements, which they may or may not be, it may be good to simply remove them from the homepage entirely. But if they are important elements, they should be placed one underneath the other. Objectives is next in our list, and objectives are about what a prospect can do on your website. And the thing with objectives is that you need to make a compromise between what you ideally want a prospect to do, which is usually to make a sale of some kind. Usually you want him to buy something, and what a prospect himself is going to want to do. So you need to find a happy medium between business objectives and prospects objectives, because they're not usually the same thing, especially on a homepage when the prospect doesn't yet know much about you. Having a look at HubSpot, because of the fact that there's a decided lack of orientation, just about any objective that's not related to finding out more information is premature. And that's simply a case of the visitor doesn't know enough to make an informed decision about taking any action. Now, there are obvious objectives on the navigation bar, primarily what is HubSpot is going to be interesting to a lot of people, but they're not going to want to click on it. They want to know what it is straight up. The nav bar is very clear, which is good. It's a little bit cramped looking, but there's nothing unclear about it. The primary calls to action here are the main problem, and that's because what you've got here are two primary calls to action, which are clickable, but they don't have anything to represent clickability. So you've got these three columns underneath. So it's getting a bit messy, isn't it? You've got these three columns underneath, and they are very visually powerful, and they're competing with the calls to action, and they're winning. Because the calls to action, A, don't have any contrast, and B, don't have anything to indicate that they're clickable. They do get attention with the handwriting, but they don't have any underlining, they don't have a button around them to indicate that they can be clicked on, which means that they're almost certainly not going to get clicked on a lot more than ought to be the case. The calls to action in the three columns, these ones here, are actually quite visually strong because of the fact that they're orange and stand out, but they are quite small as well. Now, if they're important for the objectives of the homepage, I would make them bigger so that they're easier to read and easier to hit. And if they're not important, I would prevent them from competing with other calls to action by simply removing them. Lastly, these little things here, what is going to happen when I click on them? It's unclear. When I mouse over them, I can see in my status bar that I'm actually going to get taken away from the homepage, and that's generally something that you don't want to happen. If it's important for users to be able to go to Facebook and YouTube and LinkedIn and Twitter, then I would suggest making this more prominent and making it much clearer that they're actually going to be taken away from the homepage. But it's hard to see how these objectives fulfill any useful purpose for a homepage, and I would actually remove them entirely just so that they aren't competing for attention in any way. Desirability is a question of how much users want to click on the objectives that you've given them. And because of the difficulty with orientation and the difficulty with even spotting the objectives on the homepage for HubSpot, we do have some issues here as well. However, those aren't the only problems. In fact, the main problem comes from the fact that desirability is very largely influenced by what you say, not by what you show. And in that regard, we have three issues. The first is that there is no headline. A headline is extremely important for getting users to stay on your site. It needs to say something that is extremely interesting to them, and usually that will be by taking a thought or a problem or a desire that they have in their head at the time that they come to your site and speaking to that in the headline directly and offering to solve a problem or to fulfill a desire for them. The other thing that you need to do is, once you've got the headline, you need to actually have some copy to come after it so that there is a continuation of thought, a continuation of a conversation that starts in the headline. And you can think of a homepage as being like a front door. When someone comes to the front door of your business, if they don't know what you do, you would explain to them, and if they then wanted to find out more information, you would point them in a couple of likely directions. So the same thing needs to happen on your homepage. You need to start a conversation, and you need to then point them in the right directions with your calls to action. It doesn't have to be a large amount of text, just a couple of paragraphs is quite sufficient on a homepage generally, but it is important to have that conversation started so that the user feels like he's engaged with someone rather than just a faceless entity. And thirdly, there's a difficulty with these calls to action themselves in that very likely starting a free 30-day trial and requesting free inbound marketing assessment are not the kinds of actions that anyone is going to want to take when they first arrive on a homepage. 8 out of 10 people arriving on a homepage are not looking to actually buy anything or test anything or try anything right away. They're simply gathering information. They might not even be intending to buy from anyone right now. But more importantly, even if someone was interested in testing or trying, they are going to want to learn more to begin with. So for someone like a marketer coming along and seeing that they can request a free inbound marketing assessment, sure, it's free, that's good, but the fact that it's an assessment implies that there's another person at the other end doing it, which implies that they're kind of committed to something, and there's a sense of obligation, a sense of getting actively involved in a company that they haven't yet sort of staked out and made sure that they actually want to get involved with, and they don't want to be feeling like they're backing out of something once they've actually got this marketing assessment going. So it would be a very smart idea to offer them a lot more information about the marketing assessment before you actually get to asking them if they want to take it. Same thing with a business owner. A free trial does imply a fair amount of commitment in that a lot of people who'll be looking at taking a free trial are probably going to realize from past experience that a trial really is a kind of a trial. There's a negative connotation attached to that word because it's a lot of work. A trial isn't just playing around and having fun and games. It generally requires a fair amount of evaluation and getting to know the product. The kind of thing that you really want to present as an option further down the line once they've actually had the chance to investigate what you do and see that it's worth trying. Lastly, and it's a very minor point, the copy that you have here, whoops, my bad, the copy that you have here is very, very small. So if you're looking at adding body copy to the site, which I strongly recommend, I would make it bigger than that. I would make it 16 pixels. And if you have a very large percentage of your prospects as younger people and people using bigger screens, then it's probably okay to use 14 or 15 pixels, but below that it starts to get very, very difficult to read, even for people with good vision. They start to have to squint, and a lot of people, even though they can read it, they'll tend to zoom it. So it's a good idea to just avoid any friction there and make it a little bit bigger. However, that is a minor point, and if I were to list top 4 recommendations, if I had to distill down all of my advice into 4 points, I would say, firstly, get some orienting elements into the eye path of your reader so that they understand where they are, so they can make an informed decision about the objectives that you want them to fulfill. Secondly, create a big fat headline that speaks directly to a need or a desire that they have as they come to your site. Thirdly, carry on that conversation or start that conversation with some copy that explains to them a little bit about what they can achieve, the reasons that it's worth achieving, the reasons that you're different to your competition, something that will get them interested. And fourthly, clarify the calls to action and assure their relevance as well. So firstly, make sure that they stand out more by using proper buttons that people can see can be clicked. And secondly, make sure that those calls to action are something that your average prospect is going to want to click on. You'll probably get a lot more clicks on your calls to action if they're something that your typical prospect arriving on your homepage will find interesting, especially in light of the other elements that you've added as per my previous recommendations. So, if you're not Dharmesh, feel free to email comments, questions, or hate mail to non@informationhighwayman.com. And I will now be returning to our regularly scheduled program, and you'll see me again on Friday for the Ace of Spades.